Hello and welcome to the Progress Texas Burning Issues Climate Justice Town Hall. I'm your moderator and host, Advocacy Manager Reagan Stone. We're here today to help you viewers and listeners get to know the high and long-term costs of liquefied natural gas or LNG operations in Texas, the major health risks, environmental damages, and real harms of prioritizing big oil and gas profits over people. We brought together frontline communities and policy experts from across Texas to explain and share what you can do to support climate justice in 2024 as we move forward Texas towards a greener, cleaner future. If you have any questions during the program, please jump to Progress Texas Facebook page and drop them in the live video stream chat. Go ahead and give us a follow while you're visiting. With that, we're very grateful to have such a knowledgeable panel with us. As I introduce our panelists, let's dive into our discussion. First, Naomi Yoder is the GIS data manager with the Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at Texas Southern University. Naomi does research and communication work for policy advocacy and outreach across many topics in various regions, including the Texas Gulf Coast. In particular, they focus on LNG, petrochemicals, plastics, pollution, justice, and false solutions like CCS, hydrogen, and chemical recycling. Naomi, could you start us off and provide an overview of the current landscape of LNG operations in the state, specifically highlighting the export terminals along that Texas Gulf Coast?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. So there are currently 2 operating terminals, LNG export terminals in Texas. That sounds like not many, but it's actually a lot. We only have across the Gulf Coast, we only have 5 operating terminals right now. So Freeport LNG and Corpus Christi LNG are the operating terminals, and they were also some of the first ones built. We have, in addition to that, though, one of the issues that we're going to talk about today is this extraordinary proliferation of proposed and under construction terminals. So there are in Texas, across the Gulf Coast, there are 10 proposed and 5 under construction. And of those, there are 4 in Texas. This also doesn't include expansions. So all of the operating terminals also have expansions proposed, and some of them are under construction. So in addition to that, some of the not yet built facilities are also proposing expansion. So it's essentially we have more terminals than we can really count, right? There's a lot. If you count all of the proposed under construction and expansions that we know of, there are 22. Of those, there are 7 on the Gulf Coast that come under this, the pause that was announced from the Department of Energy. So not a large percentage. And, most of those 22 are set to come online before those others that are proposed. So yeah, that's kind of the lay of the land. In a lot of those, I just want to say, there are a lot of those terminals are focused in Louisiana, especially Southwest Louisiana, but that's just across the border from Texas and in the area where most of those are. So there are a couple in Southeast Louisiana. But in general, we have between Texas and Louisiana, that's where all of these terminals are many of these terminals are supposed to be. That's also including a couple of deep water offshore port terminals that are also in the Gulf of Mexico, offshore Louisiana and Texas.
Thank you for that overview, Naomi. We'll definitely be jumping into that more. Next, I want to introduce, though, a good friend that I've got to know, John Beard, CEO of Port Arthur Community Action Network. John has over 30 years of experience in public service, including city council, mayor pro tem, numerous boards and commissions, along with representing his community after working in the petrochemical industry, now through environmental and health advocacy all the way to the U.S. Capitol and beyond. One of the few good gentlemen on the good side of the revolving door. John, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. When we spoke last, you mentioned you live next door to some of these industry facilities. What is that like being on big oil and gas's front line?
First of all, thank you for having me on the telecast here, or the broadcast. Yes, I do have quite a number of years experience, 38 years to be exact, in the petrochemical industry. And the better part of my life that I spent here in Port Arthur has been on the fence line. I was born and raised basically right across the street from the tank farm of what is now the largest refinery in the country, formerly Texaco, now Motiva. My father worked for Gulf Oil, which is now Valero. And as a kid washing dishes, looking out through the backyard, a block and a half away was their fence line. And now presently, where I'm living is about 4 blocks from the fence line. So that type of life is basically, I guess you could say it's like this. When the refinery sneezes or has a hiccup or a cough or a release of sorts, we get a cold or we get pneumonia or we smell it. Whatever happens there, depending on the wind direction, we know about it. We're on the, as they say, front lines of whatever's affected that goes on in the plant if you're downwind of it outside of the plant. And that means that you can have anything from odors to dust to mist that may come in the air. But essentially, you smell exactly the same things you do in a refinery based on my experience. So it's very much like living there, except you don't get compensated for being in the refinery or working for them. You have some of the same exposures to a degree as people that work there. You just simply don't work in the refinery itself.
And we'll be definitely getting more into those health aspects of that. Thank you, John. Next, I'd like to introduce Elida Castillo, Texas Director for Chispa, Texas. Elida is a community organizing rock star. She has invigorated the environmental movement in South Texas and her home base of Corpus Christi with new leaders, increased voter participation, as well as holding elected officials accountable to their promises. After speaking with you, Elida, and we're confirming this with Naomi, there are 7 export terminals currently nationwide, 2 of those operating in Texas, 3 on the Texas-Louisiana border, and a couple others coming online very soon in the state. Despite what some in our audience will know as the Biden administration's LNG pause, there are still 17 new projects that were already permitted prior. Now, surprisingly enough, big oil and gas hasn't had enough. They're trying to burn up our planet quicker than we were already scheduled. This statistic backing this claim up straight from the Department of Energy, folks, quote, if all projects currently in the permitting pipeline are approved, the total LNG export capacity for U.S. source gas would more than quadruple, end quote. Elida, could you give us a background into what this Biden pause is and why is it so important?
Yes, so thank you for that question, Reagan. The Biden pause is just a time for the Department of Energy to be able to review the public interest standard and to see if, this is, LNG exports or liquefied natural gas, which we actually call frack gas, because there's nothing natural about LNG, if this is in the public interest. And so we've only been exporting LNG since the ban was lifted in 2015. Here we have Corpus Christi LNG, which is actually located in Gregory, Texas, which is a majority Latina, low-income community of color. And it's not, Corpus Christi, it is in Gregory. And those are the communities that are being impacted by these facilities. So this pause is an opportunity for the Department of Energy to be able to study the health impacts of, exports or fracking on our communities, and how does that play into this like overall picture of the climate crisis? It's also, they're able to determine like the cost on our economy, the depletion of our resources. And if this is truly something, the direction that we want to be going in. And, you have some on the opposition and from the oil and gas industry saying that this is a ban. This is not a ban, and this is only to non-free trade agreement countries. So it is not stopping current operations, and we are actually, during the Biden administration, a lot more exports were made to countries, foreign countries. So, this is not going to impact operations of those currently operating facilities. And it's just an opportunity for the Department of Energy to be able to study, just the impacts of these operations in the last, 5-10 years on our communities. So just wanted to just really clarify that, because we've been hearing false narratives on that per usual.
Thank you for setting us straight. There is a lot of big oil and gas lies out there right now, and we'll definitely be covering some more of that too. But before our last panelist, Emma Guevara, joining us from the Rio Grande Valley, organizer with the Texas Sierra Club, Emma sees her wins by educating and bringing huge audiences to major decision body meetings like the recent transfer of land surrounding SpaceX and Texas parks. We are very glad to have you with us today, Emma. When we spoke last, you mentioned that the Pacific Coast and Florida do not have any of these export terminals, but rather a different type of economic interest. But in Texas, we know with powerful interest groups running the show, that is not necessarily the case. Is the RGV really our last hope for pristine ecosystems on our Texas coast? And can you please give us a snapshot of what's going on there and what's at stake in the Rio Grande Valley?
Yeah, sure. Hi, all. My name is Emma Guevara. I'm cool with any pronouns, and I'm the Brownsville organizer for the National Sierra Club. So currently, Brownsville's beach, Boca Chica Beach, is the last piece of untouched coastline in Texas. So it really is kind of the final hope to keep any of that coastline untouched, because it hasn't been messed with just yet. Unfortunately, very, very close to it is SpaceX's Star Base facility, and within the same 10-mile radius, the facilities for the proposed LNG terminals that we have, Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG, are located there. So we're a little bit concerned about a lot of the cumulative impacts that could come from all of that industry being so close together, and what that means for places like our beach, for our wetlands that have a lot of endangered species, and then are also sacred spots for the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe of Texas. Yeah, I think currently that's kind of what we're looking at. It's a little bit scary to have the last bit of untouched coastline for sure, but we're going to do what we can to try to preserve it as best as possible.
And we thank you, Emma, for your work, and all of you panelists again for joining us today. John, you know best. A lot of these safeguards, as we started talking, protecting people as well as the environment, they're at the federal level. Could you tell us a little bit more about FERC, or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, what they do, and how does the public interest play into their work?
Well, the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, is charged with granting export permit licenses to these companies to be able to do the exports, whereas the DOE, or the Department of Energy, works on the siting of those, or the location of where those LNG facilities are. And FERC is supposed to take a number of things and factors into consideration, not the least of which is the environmental justice aspects and issues surrounding those communities. And as I like to say, that they don't place these in communities of affluence or wealth, or people where people have means. They're largely located in poor communities that are economically disadvantaged, and that show the signs of a lack of economic development, of jobs and of opportunities. So what they're basically doing is putting them and citing them in communities where people have little ability to fight or push back. They don't have the financial means to hire lawyers to go after these companies and to defend them and their property and where they live and their interests. So what we're trying to do in this movement is to get FERC to be more environmentally justice conscious, and to take into consideration, not just hear the voices of people from those communities, but actually make a part of their policy of decision making, the implications that it has by locating these LNG facilities in those communities.
That's exactly right. And you're so right, John, that this is much more of a social justice issue, and that expanded public interest, it's going to be climate change, health impacts, the environment, and even another point of prices and inflation. Right now, I'm gathering there's a lot of big federal changes to this definition on the table. And one point that I noted, I might be a climate nerd here, but I was watching a congressional hearing last week, and Secretary Granholm's response to an oil and gas friendly congressman from Texas, by the way. She was being quizzed, noting that she wasn't following industry's demands. And she said, speaking of the Biden administration, quote, "Our review is in the public interest and not in the interest just of the oil and gas industry," end quote. To me, that was a true mic drop, calling out a congressman who just this year received a whopping $573,000 in campaign contributions from the oil and gas industry. But changing course for a moment, and as we dissect this, our friends at Public Citizen released a report last week about how not just health or climate is affected by increasing exports, but that the natural gas costs are just going up and up. This despite surging domestic energy production. And in fact, residential gas prices were up 50% between 2016 and 2023. This isn't just pennies. We have more gas online to the point that companies are just flaring or burning off products daily in the Permian Basin. Horrible for air quality. Nonetheless, Naomi, can you give us a background on why this inflation is happening?
Yeah, sure. So we need to consider the sort of premise in the first place of LNG. So LNG is essentially just compressed, supercooled gas, like you might have it in your stove if you have a gas stove. It's the same thing, but it's super cooled. And the reason for that is transport. So it's once it becomes super cooled, it takes up way less volume than it did if it's just gas, right? So it's super cooled methane gas, and the only way that makes sense for the shipping industry and for the oil and gas industry to transport that gas overseas is by this supercooling method. So that's the kind of background, right? So whenever we're talking about LNG and the finances or the economics around it, we're talking about an international setting. That's we have to, right? Because there's an export imperative. So the export industry of methane gas has grown almost exponentially since 2015 when we started exporting gas. LNG exports now comprise about 20% of our entire gas usage in the United States. It's a huge, huge number. The higher domestic prices of gas that we see in the United States is better for the LNG exporters. And this is found by various studies, including those from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, or IEFA. So IEFA has found that we can even almost conclude that LNG exports only work when domestic gas prices go higher. So they're sort of the industry is relying on our elevated gas prices here in the U.S. For the whole system to work. So it's essentially, they're not telling us, they're not telling us as consumers what the cost is just in terms of our pocketbook. They also aren't telling us, about all of these other myriad impacts. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is the scope of pipelines. So we not only have the export terminals that are climate bombs and just these horrible, enormous facilities, but we have thousands and thousands of miles of pipeline. In Texas alone, there are 4,000 miles of pipelines either operating or proposed that are specifically for LNG export. That's a lot. That's, it sounds like a lot. It is a lot. That's, the upstream in terms of fracking pipelines, and then the LNG export terminals, and then shipping, all of those things, not to mention the end usage, contribute to this kind of enormous impact of LNG and of methane gas on our environment and on our economy.
You're so right. And that upstream impact is definitely something that we're following here at Progress Texas as well. Follow-up question to you really quickly, Naomi, as well. Where are these huge corporations sending the gas? There's so much talk that it's going to Europe. Is that true?
So it is sort of. So that has changed just in the past couple of years. And it sort of fluctuates pretty much every year. So, I think that saying, oh, everything goes to Europe, it's not the whole picture. The vast majority of LNG across the world has been sent to Asia. Asian markets tend to be, they have developed their LNG import infrastructure the most. So we have, so Japan used to be the largest importer, and that was overtaken by China a couple of years ago. So those two markets are enormous. And then there's several other Asian countries that are also large importers. But the other thing about this is that Europe, it's not every country in Europe that's importing LNG, and so that's when we look at country by country. When we say Europe, it's actually the EU. So if we were to break that out by country, it would be a lot less than Asia. So anyway, there is gas going to Europe. Most of what, when we think of a country by country breakdown, it's Asia.
And thank you. And that definitely gives us a look into, our notion of big oil and gas profits over people and their health and the prices here back at home as well. Let's come back to the States, though, for a moment. And I do want to talk about health in our frontline communities. As I drove down to Padre Island National Seashore last summer, a beautiful place. But before I got there, I saw industry next to neighborhoods. Elida, you were telling me, along with LNG, there's plastic plants, refineries, and even a hydrogen plant coming online. Can you tell us how LNG is impacting your neighbor's health?
Yes. So luckily, the hydrogen plant is, with community pushback and, really strong organizing, not just by Chispa, Texas, but by some of our partners who are in the community, Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch, where one of these facilities is planned to be built. It's actually an ammonia facility. And, in the Robstown, Kalalan community, there's a green ammonia facility, which are all tied to hydrogen. We do have these other very terrible facilities. And so LNG, as I mentioned, this facility, Corpus Christi LNG, aka Cheniere LNG, was built in 2017. It went through expansion in 2019, and now they're trying to expand again. And just in this short amount of time, like the community of Gregory has seen a lot of their community members come down with like illnesses, asthma, heart disease, accelerated kidney disease. And, they try to tie this to, well, it's what you eat, it's what you're doing here. But the sad fact is that a lot of our communities are in food deserts. They're still very much low-income communities. These facilities did not do anything to help improve the quality of life. They did not create the jobs that they say that they create. All they do is they bring destruction. And when we're exporting LNG, we really are exporting death, the death of our environment and the death of our community members. And that is what Europe and Asia and all these other countries are importing from our communities, communities in the Permian Basin, and communities in the Gulf South and Africa and other countries where fracking is happening and where exports are happening. So this is not a practice that should be continued because of the health impacts. When these facilities are flaring, they are flaring benzene, they're flaring carbon monoxide, they're flaring formaldehyde, they're flaring, PM 2.5, which is so tiny that when you breathe it in, it could get into your bloodstream and cause lung issues. So we have seen, an increase in so many terrible health problems in our communities because of these things. And then also just the impacts of this in our water. Texas Commission on Environmental Quality does not look at these facilities when they're getting their air permits or when they're getting their water permits. They don't look at them on a cumulative impact. So they'll give a permit for air quality and not consider like how it's impacting the water, how it's impacting our soil, because what we learned with gravity, what goes up must come down, and all of this comes down onto our communities and into our bodies, and that is not being taken into effect.
And just like you were saying, there's permits being given out in a way that is looking at one facility and not always at the community as a whole as well. John, I know you're in a frontline community as well. Are you seeing specific disparate health outcomes in Port Arthur or along the Texas-Louisiana border versus, say, other communities that don't have LNG? And John, you're going to have to unmute there.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, most of these communities where these facilities are being located already have massive petrochemical facilities. And because of that, the exposure of their citizens to the toxins and the contaminants that are released from those facilities have, just as Elida said, a cumulative effect. And I do not believe that those things are taken into account when these facilities are cited, these LNG facilities are cited there, who add more to it. Quite simply, what they add to, in the case of Port Arthur, is more contaminants that affect our respiratory system, heart, lungs, and our basic human physiology. Because Port Arthur has over twice the state and national average for cancer, as well as those other diseases, heart, lung, and kidney disease. And because of that, and because of the pollution that's already here, now these companies come in and TCEQ sets limits and levels which add to it. They don't decrease that. They don't reduce the amount of pollution. They add to that pollution, and it creates another level of impact, a desperate impact that is not necessarily maybe associated with it, but it adds to it just the same. So those are facilities located here aren't of any help or benefit to us from a health point of view.
And I know you were saying yesterday when we spoke, you were talking about the community's hospital is having trouble as well. How is that playing into this?
Well, at one time, Port Arthur had 3 hospitals proper in the city limits and a fourth that's additional just outside of it. Now we're down to 1. And that one hospital just recently declared bankruptcy. It's a Stewart operated facility. And they just declared bankruptcy with about 8 of their hospitals. They say that there's not going to be a loss of service or whatever. But for a city of almost 60,000 to have only one hospital, and that hospital being on life support, is very troubling, especially in a community that has 2/3 of our citizens, of 57,000, are considered economically disadvantaged. And those are the people that suffer the most and get the least help because they don't have medical coverage or insurance. And so they have to virtually live in the emergency rooms, which can be quite expensive. So these facilities locating here with those types of social issues and health issues, as well as the climatological issues that come from the pollution is simply just not a good idea. And that's why it's important during the pause that the public interest determination, what is in the best interest of the public? And in communities like ours, it's not in the best interest to locate it here because they're going to do further harm. And it shouldn't do any harm. You shouldn't have to live in a condition or an area that is being harmed by these pollutants and contaminants when you're already suffering from the pollution and contaminants of those facilities that are already in your community that have been here, like in the Port Arthur's case with Motiva and Valero, over 120 years. So that cumulative effect is showing itself in the mortality rates and the cancer rates and the incidence rates of chronic diseases and illnesses in the people that live in these cities and communities.
And I can't imagine for a risk standpoint or worker safety standpoint that those reductions in healthcare opportunities, regardless, of course, thinking about the community itself, that's just that becomes extremely dangerous as well. But Emma, is the media reporting these health impacts, or is this just all about jobs in the economy? I know you spoke a little bit about the media supporting the industry in some ways, but what are we as organizers, advocates, scientists, and academics, community members? What are we up against there?
Yeah, so I think something that all of us on this panel can attest to is speaking about the health impacts to reporters and then the reporters not using any of that information. I know for us specifically, there's almost no discussion of health impacts in the media. It's almost always economic or job impacts for the most part, which is kind of interesting because at this point in Texas, I believe it's the wind industry employs more people than the oil and gas industry at this point. So the whole argument about jobs kind of doesn't make sense either. I think we're definitely up against the silencing of that kind of material because that's what's the most compelling, in my opinion. That's the information that when we talk to parents concerns them the most, about volatile organic compounds in the air, the increased risks of asthma, and similar to what John was saying, we're also a community where 40% of our population lives, below the poverty line, with a lot more sitting right above it. So there's a lot of issues with access to healthcare, access to insurance, and things like that. So adding more health risks, adding more pollution to our communities, a lot of which are already dealing with environmental issues outside of these LNG terminals, is just not good. It's not helpful to anybody. And is it worth a few jobs? I personally don't think so.
I don't think so either. And piggybacking off of you, Emma, as our resident academic, Naomi, I shared this story with you last week when I was a kid in the 90s. I remember on a broadcast similar to Good Morning America, there was a segment about clean energy. They would show some windmills and then pose reasons why natural gas was clean. And come to learn, this was a project funded by an oil and gas company. How is that even possible? Lying to me as a child, I mean, I'm kind of heartbroken, and this is the reason I'm here today. But is this still happening today?
Yeah, unfortunately, all the time. I'm smiling because, if you don't laugh, you would cry. It's just, it's extremely pervasive. Not only because of the lies like that, but because of the basic fundamentals of climate change that, the oil and gas industry and the major oil and gas producers have been being, brought up on charges about, right? There's been multiple court cases looking at and holding those companies accountable for, especially Exxon, right, for not divulging their research that showed how bad climate change would be and their contribution to it. So, so it's like it's an industry built on lies. I mean, that's the only way that we can explain it, because why else would you, why else would you lie to kids, right?
Why would you lie to kids? Yeah. And I know there was a Frontline and ProPublica documentary last year kind of noting that ExxonMobil cover up specifically.
Yeah, and I wanted to use another example because as you say, there is this kind of idea, even amongst our administration, that gas is a cleaner fuel than others, and I just want to say that. So, for example, in China, I told you that China is a huge importer of LNG. That doesn't mean, that coal is not still being used, right? And so that's part of what's happening is there's this sort of like posturing, around, well, LNG gas is better for some reason. It's still a fossil fuel. It's still, from the estimates that we've seen and that researchers have looked at, the entire life cycle footprint, let's say, of LNG is larger than coal. So it's not, there's nothing clean about a fossil fuel. That's the whole point. And so, that's what they're not telling us, right? They're not telling us that there's a problem with fossil fuels. They're telling us that we need to find ways to be able to continue to use those fossil fuels. And that's kind of the heart of this misinformation campaign.
It is sad, and I hope we can come to a day where we're not lying to our kiddos either. We're getting close to the audience Q&A section, but right before, I want to set the stage by asking each of you to tell us what our audience can do to combat this misinformation and help fight climate change. To start, a reminder to everyone, you can be a climate justice voter. But panelists, what can our audience do further? John, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Well, first of all, people need to get involved and educate themselves on the issues regarding climate change. There's a lot of misinformation going out, even from some quarters saying that this isn't real, that it's not actually happening. It's called the weather stupid. No, it's not. The abnormalities we've seen in the weather are actually caused by the increase of carbon in our atmosphere, largely due to human activity, driving cars, buses, planes, anything that burns or releases the gases that come from burning fossil fuels is contributory. And, going back to what you said earlier about, them wanting which gas is cleaner. Yeah, it may be cleaner, but it still is dirty. It's just another form of it. It still puts carbon in the atmosphere. It still puts particulates and VOCs and other matter in the atmosphere that are harmful to us. So people have to first educate themselves on the issues and get the facts. There's a lot of garbage out there, but you have to sort through it, sift through it, and then come to an understanding and realization just based on what you see and what you know, that climate change is real and that our lives and our health and the planet are being affected. And then what we also have to do, those of us in this movement and others, is to push back against these lies and these rumors. A lie can only succeed when good men say or do nothing. We have to push back. We have to speak the truth to power and call a thing what it is. Just recently, I was in a House of Representatives hearing, and even the state of Texas had a hearing here. And some of the things that they talked about, like Emma mentioned about the jobs and other things like that, and the education and how it lifts up families. Well, why is it that in all these communities that the unemployment rate is so high and that the poverty rate is also high and the rate of people who are economically disadvantaged is high? If they bring such good things to life, then why are our communities suffering the way they are due to the petrochemical industry? So we have to constantly push back, speak the truth to power, educate ourselves, and then educate others on what's actually going on, and then really get involved in helping make this transition and change from fossil fuels to renewable clean energy that can also create jobs and opportunities in the very communities that have been harmed by the petrochemical industry.
John, thank you for speaking that truth. Emma, do you have something to add there too as well? What can our audience do?
Yeah, I think I definitely want to echo what John said and just say that we should just talk about it a lot more. That's been one of the most helpful parts of our organizing around SpaceX, has been really building a narrative around it, because a lot of people are being told a very different story. And so we've seen a lot of success and like a lot of exciting moments where people we've never spoken to know our story and are able to bring it up in their own spaces and talk to their own people about it. And I feel like we've really spread that story really far, and that's what we're continuing to do. And that's really made some of the biggest difference. Because if people don't know what they don't know, you've got to make sure the community is aware.
And organize that. And thank you for doing that as well. Elida, can you add to this as well? And I also want to ask, what are some of your favorite news channels or places that we can educate ourselves?
Yeah, so we work closely with reporters. Emma touched on this. Unfortunately, where a lot of our industry is located, you cannot trust our media here because they do tend to cover more positive stories of the fossil fuel industry because, unfortunately, the paper industry is dying. So a lot of the ads, a lot of that is dependent on, sponsorship, and these fossil fuel companies throw a lot of money, towards these papers and to the local news channels. So follow like Inside Climate News, DSmog, follow us on social media, Chispa, Texas. We speak with our community members. We live here. We are impacted by it. So we do not have a bias other than doing what's right for our community and, really calling out, as Emma mentioned, like speaking with one another and really learning from each other because what we want is the best for our communities. We want thriving communities. We want to have sustainable economies, and we want to have environments that we're able to live in, not just in the present moment, but for future generations. And, pay attention, research also who you vote for. A lot of this isn't just on who the president is. A lot of this on, local government has a lot to do with it. State government and who your congressional leaders are also matter, because when it comes down to local governments, they're the ones who decide, your school districts, your counties, your cities, if they're going to give them an industrial district agreement, if they're going to give them a tax abatement. And a lot of these facilities rely on tax abatements to be able to build out because they don't have the funding up front. So this allows them to save the money in the meantime and while they're building their facilities. So follow that, talk to your neighbors, just be able to follow our groups. And, if it doesn't sound right, please research it. Don't just share it, contact it and get more information because, there's so many different reports that are out there on how we are impacted by these long-term. And for our groups, for our people, we just want the best. Like I have a niece and nephew. I want them to be able to go swim in our wonderful beaches, which they cannot at this moment. I want them to be able to enjoy our environment. And so we're doing the best for our communities. And so that's why we are in this fight, because it is a fight for our future. So follow us, follow Inside Climate News. Texas Observer has some good stories. Texas Monthly has some as well. Texas Tribune, and DSmog. And there's a really good podcast called Drilled. And then, Progress Texas and, the Bullard Center, Sierra Club, Pecan, all of y'all. There's just a lot of good info out there. So just reach out to us. We're here for y'all.
Thank you, Elida, and thank you for being in this fight with us as well. Naomi, do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, sure. I love everyone has talked about talking to people and sharing information. Information is power. So I 100% agree with that. And I'd also kind of adding on, I think approaching all of this, right? Like our solutions to climate change and our issues and everything, approaching life with from a place of curiosity, and not assuming that we're correct all the time, right? Or at least like not being afraid to be wrong, that I can find out something else. We've seen this happen, so many times with, for example, carbon capture, where it sounds like a great idea. There's things that sound great, and then once we dig into it, once we kind of tease it apart or we find out more, that's not the full story, right? And there's a lot more going on that we're really concerned about. And, so kind of being open to learning as we go, and none of us knows everything, right? So we're all in this together, and we have to kind of, behave that way, right? And that's part of what we're trying to hold our, corporations and governments accountable for. And then, so that's my next point actually, is that, individual actions do matter. They're important. They're hugely important. And the systems are what's, at stake. That they're the big problem here, right? It's not that what I decided to do today, it's what we all decide at each point. And so that changing those systems is what's really important. And, in Texas, that means that definitely voting, as everyone has said. Somebody else said something about, local government. And also in Texas, vote for the railroad commissioners. We have this strange agency in Texas that a lot of people don't even know about. So, it's important to participate in all of your civic, abilities, right? These are abilities that we have to be able to vote and get some of our values reflected from our representatives. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that, Naomi, and thank you for all of your work as well. You're exactly right. As each of you said, it's education, it's getting involved in your community, it's getting involved with each of these organizations right here. I'm seeing which way I'm pointing. They're all fantastic, and so get involved with your community and be that climate voter. Now we're going to turn to our audience. We have a few submitted questions, as well as you can submit a question right now in the chat of our Facebook live stream. Find us at Progress Texas. And again, go ahead and give us a follow while you're visiting. Our first question is from Hannah in the Permian Basin. She says, I was watching a Texas Tribune panel yesterday where the executive vice president of the Permian Basin Petroleum Association, that is a trade group, said the quote, the more we produce, the more we emit is a lie. Can y'all shed light on this? John, can you shed some light on this?
Sure. The lie is really what he said, because the more production, the more extraction you have, the more you're going to, by its natural process, emit more pollutants into the air. We're putting more carbon into play. I've coined a phrase, the government talks about decarbonizing. Well, you can't decarbonize while at the same time recarbonizing or putting more hydrocarbons into play. You have to reduce the amount that you're using and putting into play to have a direct effect on how much gets released. So the very process that his organization's members use, from extraction to refining through the whole supply chain of petrochemicals and hydrocarbons, creates more emissions. So the only way we get out of this is we've got to use less and do less. Or in other words, as our indigenous brothers and sisters say, keep it in the ground. It's buried there for a reason. The more of it we can keep in the ground, the less gets put into play. So if there was any lie or deception, it was on his part saying that.
And Naomi, as a researcher there, can you give some backing to that as well? Again, it's the quote is, the more we produce, the more we emit is a lie. And that was again said by the Permian Basin Petroleum Association. Right.
Yeah. Well, so I've seen zero data that backs that up. So that's what I would say is, where are you getting those numbers? How did you find that out? What leads you to say that, right? And I'm sure there wasn't a place for people to be able to ask that, or if the interviewer didn't ask that, then we don't know, right? But that's, that doesn't square with anything that I've read and studied and looked at. So I can't, that doesn't sound right to me.
Yeah, the scientists and the researchers you're speaking with, I'm guessing would say the same.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you. The next question we have is from Lindsay in Central Texas. Lindsay asks, it seems like the odds are stacked against us in Texas due to widespread industry power. We kind of just got that from our quote before. But what is a recent win in your work that keeps you going? Elida, I want to start with you.
I think for us, just getting this pause implemented was a huge win for everybody. Nobody was really expecting that to happen, but because of the work of frontline groups and, NGOs and congressional leaders who are really paying attention to the communities, they really pushed the Department of Energy and the Biden administration to really consider the impacts of exports and fracking on communities. So I think everybody can celebrate the pause on LNG, as a win, because nobody saw it happening. They were hoping, they were praying, they were really advocating, but that just shows the power of people power.
You're so right. Emma, can you add to that? What's a recent win that's keeping you going?
I would say the mobilization of community members from Brownsville to Austin for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department meeting regarding this land swap that we've kind of been dealing with. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department is trying to swap basically our beach with SpaceX for a large amount of other land that's not the beach, in order to create like some kind of wildlife nature conservation zone, which is cool, but SpaceX doesn't own any of that land, and it's our beach, which is pretty important to our community. And we had so many people that managed to make the trip from Brownsville to Austin, which is about 6 hours driving. It was like 4 different vans of people that came and made public comments to help save our beach. I think just having that many people together is such a big win, and knowing that many people care and showing them, even regardless of like decisions, like, hey, a lot of people care about this and there are a lot of eyes on you, and you can't make these decisions, quietly.
I love that. And thank you for your work continuing to bring those large audiences as well. John, I'm going to prompt you here. I know you were in Europe recently advocating surrounding this topic. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what that win looked like?
Sure. It's a win, but I'd like to preface that by saying that it takes a series of little victories, little small battles that won to win the war. You don't just win the war totally outright. There's stepping stones to that. And one of them was attending the annual general meeting of ING Corporation, which is one of the major financiers of these LNG import and export facilities. But getting them to the table after going to the AGM and really talking with people who are in their global and corporate sustainability and various levels, who are directly accountable to the CEO and the board of directors, is indeed a win, because now we can relate to them what the concerns and issues are, and even find gaps in some of the due diligence work they say they're doing. That's one of the cases we bring out when we show them, well, whoever you had doing your research to tell you that Port Arthur or Corpus or Brownsville was a good place to site these facilities. Did they tell you about the level of illness and that is coming from the petrochemical industry that's already there? Did they also tell you about the fact that they're going to be emitting more and adding to it, which is going to make conditions worse for people that are there? So we continue to fight that fight. And on that same note, our win last year in the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court, getting the air quality permit for Sempra LNG thrown out, is a victory, even though it's gone back to a lower level court for some other determination. But it is a victory because it showed that the system is slanted against us and does not work fairly to protect communities. And then you also have the fact that we've had the current head of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, as well as the previous head, come and visit Port Arthur. And that's part of an overall effort that we do to elevate the voices of people in our community and to draw attention to what's happening here. Because it's my belief, if you really knew and understood what was happening in these communities of color and what these companies are doing to real, live, actual people, how can you, if you have any shred of decency or humanity, allow yourself to be part of something that's doing that and not speak out against it? So we take that message to the corporate boardrooms. We take that message to the streets, to our senators, congressmen, and have these hearings here. I kind of like to say Port Arthur is kind of being the focal point of a lot of this because of these two recent hearings that were held on the state and the federal level right here. And they had a chance to see it. So if we can impress upon them that these are actual people and their lives that you're affecting by your decisions and hold them accountable, and continue to make these small gains, we will win war eventually. But it takes winning those little small battles and building up and getting more people involved to see that you can make a difference. And that's how we're going to win.
And each of our audience members has a part to play in this as well, which I think is so important to share with them and to hopefully invigorate this movement and this fight. Naomi, I know we spoke a little bit about youth being more involved on this issue. It's one of the most important reasons to young voters to come out to the polls. Can you tell us a little bit? Is TikTok still out there that I'm hearing? Is that where folks are getting their news regarding this?
Yep. TikTok, Instagram. There's a lot of social media that is, like Elida said, the newsprint is going, away, right, because of this. And so a lot of people, young people every age get their news now from a lot of social media. So that's it. It's still growing. It's still active. It's ever growing. And I think that contributes to what we were talking about earlier about just like talking to your friends and neighbors. If you make a TikTok video about what you're finding out, about what you're learning, it reaches people, right? It doesn't just sit with you. So there's a huge opportunity there. And I do think that, we young voters are a huge, important piece of what comes next, especially for Texas. We need you, and we will make changes because of those voters that are voting now and that have recently started voting. So it's we welcome those folks, and it is really important that we all find out as much as we can and share that information together.
Thank you, Naomi. We have one question left from Jamie Lawson at the Houston Climate Movement. She asked on Facebook, she's asking this to Emma: are you or the Sierra Club working with the Carrizo tribe? And can you tell us a little bit more about that work in Brownsville?
Hi. So yes, we definitely do work with the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe of Texas. And part of our community group, South Texas Environmental Justice Network, the tribe does work really closely with us there. And then a lot of members are also tribal members as well. So we do a lot of work with the tribe, and that's really important in my theory of change, to make sure to center the tribe since their native lands are being impacted. And we always make sure to try and do that as best as we can.
Thank you very much, Emma. And I'm going to ask one more question with our last minute here. Joe Higgs is asking, how important are tax abatements from school districts and counties to LNG? Are they important to financial viability or just gravy to highly profitable companies to pad their bottom lines? Who would like to jump on that one?
I can say something about that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Naomi.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. I was going to say that it's the opposite actually. Like if, it's not about their bottom line. It's actually really helping them make profit. So that's what's happening with tax abatements in Texas and Louisiana, actually. So we have these millions and millions of dollars being awarded essentially to companies that already make millions and millions of dollars, on a monthly basis. So, I think that our colleagues at Texas Campaign for the Environment found that there were about, I think it was $30 million per job that was awarded in tax subsidies for Freeport LNG alone. So that's nothing like financial viability. That's, lining people's pockets.
And John, you wanted to follow up there?
Yeah, next to the banks, oil and gas is an industry that can't fail. And Mr. Higgs said that correctly. It is gravy. Having worked in a position where you had to make decisions on granting tax abatements when I was a city councilman, come to find out that they really don't need it. It's just another sweetener to the pot. They don't need it, but not having to pay that tax bill is more money in the pot. When you combine it with other incentives, with other things that the government does to enable them to, be successful and do other subsidies, so to speak, like I said, how can you fail? If they make money, the subsidies kick in and the tax abatement, you can't fail. And if they make money, that's just gravy. So that's why I look at it as just merely being gravy, icing on the cake for them if they can get tax abatement, because the abatements don't offset the jobs because the jobs simply aren't there. So you have no way to make them back up in the circulatory system of our communities by people working and putting money back into the system. It's pure gravy for them. They can't fail.
Thank you, Joe, for that question. Emma, can you enlighten us on a tax abatement that I think is coming soon to a vote in your community right now?
Yes, so we're currently working on getting public comments in for a tax abatement for Texas LNG and Rio Grande LNG that would be given to them by the county. Rio Grande LNG already has a tax abatement, so they're re-voting. So we're hoping that we can get them to vote in our favor on that one as well. And we've been mobilizing the community with easy ways to send in virtual public comments, trying to explain when the meeting is going to happen and when people can show up. Unfortunately, they do like to hold these meetings on like Wednesday mornings at 9:30 a.m. So it's a little difficult when people have work, but we're trying to get in as many public comments as possible. And it comes to a vote on June 4th, so we'll see.
Well, thank you again for that work and organizing those public comments. And what county is that again in, Emma?
Cameron.
In Cameron County, so all of our folks down in the Rio Grande Valley right now. So as we conclude today, Progress Texas has a long history of bringing the stories and advocacy to the decision makers' tables through grassroots coalition networks, seeing this right here today, along with rapid response digital and traditional media. Leading up to the Texas Democratic Party convention next month, Progress Texas shared a resolution advocating for the Texas public interest in clean energy goals. We were prompting Democrats across the state to submit this environmental justice resolution at their county conventions. If you're attending the state convention, we look forward to meeting you. And to everyone, please follow our social media channels and award-winning podcasts wherever you stream in anticipation of this and further climate justice momentum in El Paso and across the state. And with that, we've come to the end of our town hall. I want to thank each of our panelists, those allies that shared this production and brought such an engaged audience. We look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you to our donors who make this work possible. And from all of us at Progress Texas, thank you.